So now we will have here on the main stage, we will have Jim Womack with Matt Savas. They will be talking about Lean's founding crisis and Lean's crisis today.
Thank you, Chris. I am so pleased to welcome our next speaker, Jim Womack. Widely considered the father of the lean movement, Jim has been talking and publishing about creating value through continuous improvement around deep customer understanding for many years. In the late 80s, he and Dan Jones led MIT's International Motor Vehicle Research Program, which introduced the term lean to describe Toyota's revolutionary management system. Based on that research, Jim co-authored The Machine That Changed the World, Lean Thinking, Lean Solutions, and Seeing the Whole Value Stream. In addition, he founded the Lean Enterprise Institute in 1997 as a nonprofit research, education, publishing, and conferencing company to ensure new knowledge about lean thinking and practices would be available to the worldwide public. Jim's leadership at LEI inspired global efforts to establish lean institutes in other countries, which ultimately grew into what you're observing today, the Lean Global Network. Jim, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Matt. We just spent 30 minutes in the back room trying to figure out how to get the slides to work right. I'll talk about that in a minute, about this virtual stuff. But what we're going to do is that Matt is going to advance the slides. Whenever I scream, Matt, advance the slide, that's what that means. And we trust it will happen. Well, thank you guys for the introduction. I don't know what I really did or invented, or certainly didn't invent anything. By the way, Christopher, I noticed that you've got a galleon and I don't. I'm in some dark hole somewhere. So I don't know how that happened, but it is what it is. So we'll move on. Let's see, Matt, why don't you flip that next slide there? I want to talk for the next 30 minutes, 28 minutes about crises in the lean world. There are really three kinds. And I hadn't really thought about that until I started thinking about this, but I think it's actually a good way to think about it. So I'm going to sort of do this in three parts. First type of crisis, second type of crisis, third type of crisis. It's that third one that most concerns me now, and so we'll get to that just shortly. And let me argue that actually a good crisis has been good for lean. The first lean crisis was at Toyota in 1950. And in bullet 2, it shows all of the bad things that Toyota was doing. 1950. It was not a startup quite, but it was a very young company. And it was really based on craft mass production methods. And the consequence of the way they were doing their work was that they had very long lead times, had lots and lots of WIP everywhere, finished product, raw materials. And when they misjudged the market in 1950, when the American occupation was getting ready to break the back of inflation in Japan, and Toyota thought the market was going to boom, so they built ahead, and they built all this stuff and had all this WIP, and they ran out of cash. And that meant the Tokyo bankers got control, who demanded massive layoff. A third of Toyota's workforce was permanently, fired. And actually, they sawed the company in two. They accused the management of believing their own sales forecast. And so the way to prevent that was to have a separate company, Toyota Motor Sales, that would draw up the sales forecast and distribute the product. And then the Toyota Motor Company would design and make the product. And it took 32 years to get that put back together. So, however, next slide. The response, first, they vowed never to run out of cash again and to grow from retained earnings. And what that meant was that people like Taiichi Ohno, the fellow who formalized the Toyota production system, didn't invent it so much as formalize it, and people working on the product and process development system and supplier management and so forth, that they had a clear focus. They needed to reduce the cash needed to run the business so that Toyota would never have to depend on anybody else again. And this became the first lean transformation, starting in 1950. Next slide. Now, interesting question. Without that crisis, would Toyota have become Toyota? Toyota was a pretty mediocre company in 1950. It's kind of average. And so it could have grown up to be like Nissan. Nissan's also a pretty good company, but they haven't changed the world. Toyota has. So my view is that this crisis at the beginning was the tailwind, kind of a different way to think about the kamikaze. That's the divine wind that saved Japan from the Mongols in 1274. It was the tailwind that Toyota needed to do the incredibly hard work they did to create the system. It was not done quickly. It took 20 years to work all of the pieces together and get the management system in place. But because of this crisis and the trauma of this crisis, they kept at it. I will talk in a minute about the fact that even with Toyota doing it, lean is a slow clock speed activity. We all thought not too long ago that we could have a 1 week Kaizen and we could permanently change something in a company, and then we could do hundreds of 1 week Kaizens and we could totally change an enterprise. And we now know that's not true. This is actually a long, slow process, and that presents some problems we'll get to in a minute. Let's go to the next slide. And since 1950, you can do your own kind of assessment of this, but it seems to me that most big transformations in significant companies have always been with the tailwind of an organization in crisis. They were about to go out of business. They couldn't, their people were totally alienated, and they couldn't do good work and so forth. There was a pervading sense of crisis that was so painful that it was greater than the pain of a lean transformation. And look, lean transformations are hard because everyone has to change their basic thinking as well as their methods. The methods, kind of straightforward and easy, the thinking, a whole lot harder. So that it's only a situation where the pain of change is less than the pain of just going ahead and doing what you've been doing and hoping for the best that creates the opportunity that we need as lean practitioners to truly transform enterprises. So we love and need crises in individual organizations, preferably organizations that still have enough money, enough cash, and enough time in a low clock speed situation to do the right thing and stay the course. But let's go to the next slide. We've had now a different type of crisis. This is the catastrophe, the discontinuity crisis, which we all know about over the last few years. And to me, it's been sort of pandemic produces recession that on the spring back produces inflation. And what we've learned, which we sort of should have known, but I think some of us hoped was not the case, that yes, it's true, a rising tide lifts all boats, but a large enough tsunami sinks all ships. And we'll even in a minute get to Toyota's problems in this great storm. We've heard on this Lean Global Connection all kinds of great feats that people did during the pandemic to reconfigure things on the fly, to do much faster than even Lean would normally do, to do very specific fixes of very specific value streams. And then as organizations, I think we've all learned how to do more with less. For example, at LEI, we finally got out of the expensive office that I thought was a great thing that we had in Kendall Square, Cambridge. Thought that made us look grown up and impressive. And we were spending a lot of money, never thought about how much on a big office that it turns out we don't need an office. And shortly we won't have an office. So there we learned how to be better sailors with less inventory. Consider office mostly just a big inventory. And that's all good. These are all great things, and I admire the people who did them. But as we see on the next slide, in fact, lean on a continuing basis needs relative stability. That Heijunka was invented by Toyota as leveling of demand, both by volume and mix, in a reasonably stable world. What they were trying to do was say, let's not introduce volatility that the customer isn't causing. Customers can be volatile, we have to deal with that, but for the most part, people are more stable and rational than we think. And what we need is a mechanism at the front end of the company to level demand so that everything upstream and into the supply base can be done on a smooth, continuous basis, and then we can take inventories down and do lots of good things. But when volume is too erratic, it's just beyond our ability to actually cope. That get to the minute about the criticism of JIT. which as you read what's in the media, you would think is the cause of all shortages. But in fact, no system of production control and logistics can deal with variations in demand beyond a certain extent. And instead, you wind up with shortages and pinch points. And in a world where lean transformations take time, that becomes a factor as well. So, two things to say about two kinds of crises: that we need love individual organizational crisis. It is the opportunity that we have to intervene and to convince people that there's less pain, basically, from listening to us than there is to continue on the path that they're on that is not leading to a good place. But there are inherent limits on what can be done when there is chaos in an entire economy. And that's just sort of a fact. So two types of crisis. But now let's move ahead one more, Matt, on the slides. I should say a word about Toyota in passing. That here's the company that did everything right in the pandemic. As demand started to go down, they talked to their suppliers. They said, whoa, we don't need all those chips right now. Wish we did, but we don't. But don't sell our capacity. Don't give it away to the electronics, consumer electronics people and so forth that we know are going to come calling. Keep everything there so when the market comes back, we can go back to doing what we do. And for the first 18 months of the pandemic, Toyota just looked great. That's the down part. They just looked great. And they passed GM in the US in sales toward the end of 2021. GM had been the market leader in sales in the United States of America for 90 years. And Toyota went flying past. And wait a minute, then there are lockdowns in Penang in Malaysia, where a large part of the world's chips are made, and in Shanghai area, which is where a lot more of the world's chips are made, the fall of 21, beginning of 22. And it turns out that there's just no way to buffer against that. You can't order gazillions of chips ahead because the designs keep changing and demand keeps changing and so forth. And so the only thing you can do is to build more capacity. That the chip industry normally works 24/7. So when things are running normally, there is no excess capacity. And to get that capacity, you have to build more facilities, install more equipment and so forth. That's going on right now. But it is a very painful and lengthy process. And so Toyota has been suffering. And I'm sure they feel the suffering in another way, this steady drumbeat of what you read out in the media about just in time as the cause of shortages. Toyota as a group is probably the only organization in the world that across the whole system, raw material to customer, can run a JIT system. And even they, running that system, can't avoid some shortages and loss of production and inability to address customer desires. So therefore, there's kind of a reputational hit there that's just not justified because, to repeat, no one can do this. No one using any system can do this. But suddenly, our poster child, Toyota, which is struggling in some other ways as well, that's a real ding on their reputation. Totally undeserved, unfortunate for them, but also unfortunate for us. Let me just say as an aside that I just got a call from Toyota this morning, and tomorrow morning they're going to deliver my new BZ4X, which is the first electric Toyota since the RAV4 they jointly did with Tesla back in 2012. So therefore, they're doing something right. They eventually got me my BZ4X. Of course, it's 4 months late and has had a lot of problems along the way. So it's this pandemic has been hard on Toyota as well. And if they are subject to pandemic, everybody is going to be subject to pandemic or other types of catastrophes, wars, and so forth. I wish it weren't so, but there it is. Now, let's go to where we are now. Next slide, Pat. What about future crises? Now, look, this is my view. Most of you on this call, and we'll get to this later, are much younger than I am, perhaps more energetic than I am, but also haven't seen as much as I have. As we emerge from this pandemic, I think there are ominous signs of a new crisis for our lean community. The basic ideas that we're trying to convince the world to adopt were really formed 70 years ago. The whole system was clearly not just described, fully designed, but actually in operation 50 years ago. That's at Toyota. And so now, as you go around the world, most organizations, particularly the big ones with the OpEx programs and so forth, say they've done lean. But it turns out when you go see them, it means they've done some experiments with a few of the tools. But there hasn't really been much change in basic beliefs. And in that situation, habituation becomes a real problem for any idea. And it becomes a problem for our ideas. Everybody thinks they've done something, even though they haven't. And they want to move on. They want to move on to the next thing. The world loves novelty. It really does. So go ahead, Mac, take that on. So that's sort of a background that we're the old news rather than the new news. And we're advocating something that produces an amazing result, but it's hard to do. And there are always other alternatives which sound easy, simple, and quick. So as we look out in the world now, the nature of work is really changing. That this movement was born out of Toyota, which was a company that manually produced products. And of course, the great symbol of that was the assembly line with 1,000 people working in tight synchronization. So we started with touch labor and kind of moved backwards. But the world today is progressively moving away from touch labor. If you go in a car plant, any car plant, anywhere, what you find is that stamping, welding, and painting are basically totally automated, including materials management, materials handling. Final assembly, they're working on. Tesla tried and failed to totally automate final assembly. Somebody will. And these new skateboard electric vehicle designs make it potentially easier. So we are associated with the old world. And we know that's not true. The great bulk of what this lean community, the 31 organizations, do is in services of various sorts, construction and finances and so forth. But that's kind of the image still, that we came out of the industrial world. And then, by the way, this mechanism that we're using right now, it's not Zoom, I realize it's Hop-In, but Zoom and Teams and all the other stuff, important to bear in mind, thank goodness, that they're only 1.0. Look, they're really pretty miserable to use. And we don't have the hardware right, and we just don't have anything right yet, but we will. So that as time moves ahead, I think it becomes practical to do more and more things virtually. And we see the pushback, at least in North America, about people coming back to the office. Turns out they really didn't like the office very much, even though I think if done right, the office is good for you. But okay. But what are we going to do about that? About our image, but also the fact that so much is going to be done virtually. The previous speaker, it was a wonderful talk, but said, gee, you can do everything virtually except the emotional part. Well, right. And that's what's wrong with the world, that people have such a hard time figuring out how to work horizontally as a team rather than vertically through a top-down command control bureaucracy. And I certainly found in the work I've done over many years, if I can go be with people right there and watch what they do and talk about what they do and get everybody touching the problem there face to face, amazing things can be done. I'm still skeptical that even when we get to Zoom 2.0 or 3.0, that it's really possible to get people to change looking at a screen. So we'll see, but I think we have to have something to say about this. Loyalty, that lean systems are designed to continuously build capability in long-term employees through many, many cycles of learning. That's what makes Toyota on a good day so brilliant. They've been doing this for 70 years. And what the world wants is to move to sort of a gig world. People complain about the gig economy, but they certainly aren't loyal to employers. And increasingly, employers aren't loyal to employees. So how do we lean thinkers talk to a world where no one believes in continuity, where you just move on? And I think that's a real issue for us. We need to know what to say. Go ahead, Matt. And there are more challenges. I do think the rate of disruption is increasing in most industries. And that makes it over time harder to defend employees and suppliers. Toyota is struggling right now with what do they do with all of the second and third tier mechanical suppliers. And many of them are small operations in an electrical and electronic age. And Toyota has historically defended its employees, defended its suppliers. And as the sort of best example of lean, whoa, what do you do in a world where that becomes progressively harder? What do we say? Now, most new companies have new products, almost all new companies, but all companies have new products too. And there is this need to nail it, which is to confirm the new concept, to scale it, and then to scale it and then to sell it, okay? And to do it quickly. That's the perceived need. It's most visible in the electric vehicle space, where everybody is just desperate to get to their public offering. And so therefore they must go fast. And that's, by the way, an industry where minimum viable products, we love, the lean startup, but minimum viable products are actually kind of hard to do. You have to spend a few billion to get something that real people can actually use. And the LPPD process is slow. The lean product and process development process is slow, so that most companies, even that want to be lean, launch immature products in immature processes, followed by massive rework. And we see it all the time. And it becomes kind of normalized. Manufacturing hell at Tesla, Elon Musk sleeping on the sleeping, at the end of the line with a sleeping bag, all of these kind of crazy and I think totally wrong-minded expedients that people do. But what are we going to offer as an alternative? I did a lot of talking to people in the EV space as they're starting up these companies. And I kept saying to them, you can go fast, and once you launch, you will go slow, or you can go slow, and then once you launch, you'll go fast. And they all said, no, we have to go fast to go fast. You see, we've got to get to the market and get all that money and so forth. And so you see what you get. Every single one of these electric vehicle companies hits the market in a situation where they may have nailed it, but they don't know how to scale it. And it's very, very hard to get a lean word in edgewise with that mentality. And we need something to say. Keep going. One more. A lot of reshoring going on. The alternative term I love is fringe shoring, which means get out of China and go to Vietnam or get out of wherever it is that you're worried about and go somewhere else rather than just go home. But anyway, it's fashionable to think about. But here's the problem. If production is brought back to high-wage countries from low-wage countries, or if it's done poorly as it was before it was outsourced, there's going to be a major hit to the standard of living. And don't forget, we're a low clock speed activity, so we need to have a stance on that. How can we be helpful? By the way, Industry 4.0 is most desired when people think about reshoring, because what they want to do is eliminate all the expensive labor. And yet we know that these kind of industrial leaps without a lean management context and a lean product and process development activity are going to produce disappointing results. We've seen it over and over and over again. It's not that they don't produce any results, but it's to say it is not what was planned. So what can we say about that? Now, our historic answer has been, well, what you need to do is have a bigger OpEx program and do more Kaizen. But what we all know is that if you do that and do that very quickly without engaging the whole enterprise, it is very difficult to sustain the results. And I would say that's a fact. I've seen it so many times that I will say it is a fact. In recent years, I've been busy going around to a lot of OpEx programs that are 20, 25, 30 years old, been doing lean since the late 80s, early 90s, and have found it very hard to sustain, and indeed doing Kaizen to put in place methods that they knew 30 years ago, but just disappeared because there was no context to support them. So we have to think about that. Just more Kaizen, just a bigger OpEx organization, I think, is not probably going to be what we need. So let's go to one more slide here. So here's my fear, that for each of these problems, that lean is no longer the go-to concept for managers in trouble. I wish I didn't have to say that, but hey, let's have some honest hindsight. That's critical self-reflection. And that in some, we have a crisis of relevance. I note out in the network that the younger the people are and the less time the organization has existed, the more fervor there is. And that's just wonderful. I've recently visited a couple of young organizations full of fervor, and that's a great thing. We couldn't do anything without it. But on the other hand, the long term, we have to be relevant, and I fear that we're losing our relevance. And what I fear is that we will treat this the way most organizations treat their competitive threat, that they just want to do more of what they've been doing, even though it's not working, until the pain becomes so great, that they have to fundamentally rethink the situation, by which time it may be too late. I don't want us to be too late. So one more slide here. It might be two. One more. Yeah, okay, one more. This is the 26th year of LEI. We've successfully completed 25 years, and we're still around. It's the 25th year of the Lean Global Network in my mind, because the network started the day that Jose Ferro in Brazil called me and said, hey, I want to do down in Sao Paulo what you're doing in Boston. Why don't we do this together? So that's a long run. And I think at this point, what we need is a serious A3 exercise on the situation we face. Hindsight, critical self-reflection is always a good thing. It's always difficult. But I think we need to be a little bit more on the surface about the root causes of our issues and about the most promising countermeasures that we might try together as a global community. The success, I think this is just a fact, the success of every movement, and this has been a movement, depends on generational pass-through. You need yokoten from horizontally from department to department and company to company, but you also need generational yokoten, if you will, pass-through, in which each new generation finds a way to state important truths in a new voice to regain relevance. Now, here's what I believe. We've got the best ideas. We've got the best way of thinking. We've got the best methods. We're better than what the world has otherwise been able to come up with. And we simply do not have the visibility, do not have the yes, we can do it that we need. I mean, we've got it, but I'm saying the organizations that we need to change. So I think we need to have a good, serious exercise on that. I don't know what John Shook and Jamie Bonini are going to talk about because we haven't coordinated, but I was recently talking with them about this issue. And I'm speaking for them, I'm just speaking for me. It seems to me we really need to figure out a way to rethink, to restate, and to move ahead. Now, the final slide. This really is final. My generation is passing. The first thing that struck me this morning when I saw that young team in the health system in Barcelona was, oh my gosh, those people are all 40 years younger than I am. Wow. Okay. So I have high hopes, not for the next generation, but for the next two generations to regain relevance. I think it's not a bad motto. Regain relevance. If we've got the best ideas and the best methods, well, we can't stop. We have to keep going. The world needs us. And I hope we will keep going. And I'll be cheering from the sidelines. By the way, I'm 74. I went to the doctor recently who said I'm remarkably well preserved for a 74-year-old. And I said, so you're saying I'm remarkably well preserved? And he said, no, I'm saying you're 74. Well, I got it. Not everything goes on forever. And now we have to put it in the hands of the next generation. Dan Jones and I are the two old guys, but there's some other folks who are pretty close to us. We've done great work. We've done amazing things. I've never, ever thought that we would have 31 organizations around the world to be talking about these things together. So, hey, that was great, but we need to do greater. And we only do that by working together. And I hope we will. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for issuing that great challenge. Chris, back to the ship.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Matt. And we will continue from here.